If I can sidetrack for just 1 second, is
Yeah.
one of the interesting things is that, yeah, again, I was having this discussion with a friend of mine about generation.
Oh, we lost you for a moment.
Am I still there?
Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Cool, cool. I think that the idea of generations is always funny because the younger generation always looks to the older generation and
Yeah,
says, "You understand nothing,
yeah,
and you've ruined everything for us."
yeah, yeah, totally,
And
100%.
and to be honest, it's the same like cycle over and over again. So no matter which generation you are, you're always looking at your next generation as like last generation did it
Yeah,
wrong, we're doing it right.
yeah,
And reality is that there's the exact same uh, things to learn from our history that
hmm,
keep repeating themselves over and over again. Sometimes it takes a little leap year,
yeah,
but every so often it keeps coming back and we have to deal with the same thing over and over again.
yeah. And we do this very bad habit, and I mean, all cultures have done this bad habit. You can actually go back
Mm-hmm.
and see this yourself really easily, and that we assume the future is more of now, right? You see that again and again and again, right? And actually, a really interesting exercise that you can do is go back and look at basically old science fiction. Like go back to the year, read science fiction in the year 1800, and basically they assume it's more of the technology of the 1800s, just sort of like placed everywhere, right? Um, I remember I saw some wonderful science fiction, for want of a better term, which basically came from the 1600s. And in the 1600s, it's sailing ships and cannons in the New World. So of course, like the expression of the future is a sailing ship with 1,000 guys on it and 100 masts and 2,000 cannons, like that science fiction for them. It's just more of now, right? When
Yeah.
obviously, of course, the future is far grander. Like there's whole revolutions there that we don't even understand.
Well, to butt in as well is at that point it comes down to sort of what I talk about in my slides as well about
Yeah,
like um, Star Wars and how it actually takes industrial designers, people
yeah,
that build functional things for society, and applies it to
yeah.
imagination.
Hmm.
And that's the same thing with this as well, is that the imagination only goes so far because
Yeah,
they look at whatever that's already been established and they
yeah,
just say that's the future.
yeah,
But in reality, you need to think of what if the whole biome is different.
yeah,
You know what I mean? You have to keep digging deeper into the knowledge of what makes this whole world whatever it is, and then build
yeah,
upon a society based on that new
yeah,
set of,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, you see that in science fiction a lot, right? Where that's why there's an Aronofsky movie, I believe, with Hugh Jackman, where he shows a spaceship, and the spaceship is basically a bubble with a tree inside it. And I really love that because he's sort of saying, like, look, it's the future. Like these things can look like anything that they're supposed to look like. They don't have to be like, giant rockets all over again. Like we don't have to just make World War II battleships for the rest of
Yeah.
humanity. But anyway, so I was talking about sort of this notion that we transfer from um, a Homeric tradition to a written tradition to eventually like a printed tradition, either hand copied or eventually sort of like machine copied, and both of which have their strong influence on society. Um, and for a long time, that's basically where we stay, with this idea that books are the pinnacle of society. That's more or less how society is formed and how society is codified. Then we transfer to something very, very different, which is celebrity, right? And celebrity, of course, extends from radio and TV and film, and then theater to a certain extent, right? And this idea that celebrity is now the pillar of society, right? And here's where Jeff and I actually start disagreeing a bit, which I think is kind of neat, because I actually see celebrity basically dying, right? Like that's kind of where I think it's on its way to. Like I think sort of, like the Trumps of this world and all the rest of that, that's almost like the highest expression of celebrity. But in the sense that, somebody like Kim Kardashian, like I've never seen her show, but I know about her. I know a number of her family members and all the rest of it. Like the celebrity is so overpowering, I can't help but know. But my son, who of course has a very unfiltered perception of what he's entertained in, what he's entertained by, and doesn't particularly care about a 22-minute TV show and then a 2-hour film. Like he doesn't care about that at all. Instead, he watches YouTube clips of people playing video games and talking about the video games. So really like hyper niche celebrity, and no matter how popular those celebrities are, I basically never learn their names. It's a different kind of celebrity, which I think is quite neat, right? And I sort of like this notion here. So yeah, so we wind up with this idea that like books are a pillar of society, celebrities are a pillar of society, and now we're into this new portion where games are a pillar of society. Like had a tremendous impact on me as a young man. Obviously, have a tremendous impact on everybody that happens to be listening right now. So there's all these things kind of connected with that I'm interested in as a result. And then just over time, Jeff and I are kind of talking about them. I'll state a bunch of them here just so people know the kind of stuff that we like to talk about. So asynchronous fun is something that I think about a lot. This idea that two people play a game, but they have two very different experiences in playing that game, right? But they both deeply, deeply enjoy it. Indeed, I think most new genre that are going to be created. Remember, every time we successfully create a new genre, we make several $1 billion. Like there's a very good reason to be thinking about this kind of stuff. So asynchronous fun is definitely one of the categories. A sort of a funny, I don't know what the right phrase for it, but kind of like unintentional educational games is, I think, a category that's very worthy of note.
What exactly do you mean by that?
So things like they're entertainment products, but in using the entertainment product, I wind up sort of bettering myself intellectually in some capacity, right? Whatever that capacity happens to be.
The only thing that comes to mind for me when I think about that is sort of the Assassin's Creed sort of history kind of reinvented. It's sort of that it feels like, right?
Assassin's Creed is an excellent example. Like a lot of gamers that never would have studied, like whatever, Victorian Britain, something I'm quite interested in. Mm-hmm. Suddenly know quite a lot about it thanks to Assassin's Creed Syndicate.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really interesting, right? And because again, that's the role that film used to do, right? Film used to be the one that pushed that sort of knowledge on people if they weren't explicitly studying it. Now, of course, it's games. So unintentional educational games, I think, are really interesting. Crusader Kings, right? Number 3 just got released. I think Crusader Kings is a phenomenal example because suddenly all these people that never would have learned about, dynastic Europe are steeped in that sort of thing, right? And kind of can't help but learn lots about that.
So when you say dynastic, I just want to make sure I understand that. That's dynasties?
Yeah, the great royal families, like the Plantagenet and whatnot, right?
Cool. Again, my vocabulary isn't the best, right? So I'm going to ask these questions.
And a lot of this is stuff that like I'm actively studying too. So like I have kind of an advantage there, to say the least, right?
Yeah.
But that's that sort of thing. Obviously, I find really, really interesting. And again, I think there's a lot of really, really good genre there, which could be unpacked. Now, at sort of like a more componential level, let's say, I think we have things like shame in games, which I think are a really, really interesting, really interesting topic. This idea that like there are shameful actions that a player can do that drives them from a community or maybe binds them to a community. Like I think there's some really tricky stuff that goes on there.
So what comes to mind when you talk about that is sort of back with Peter Molyneux's sort of, what is it, Black and White, or
Black and White,
like Fable, whenever you're picking sort of like your actions have consequences, that sort of notion that you just can't get away with everything.
Yeah.
Compared to playing Skyrim, where you basically pillage every possible thing and there's no like it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and it's we don't do shame well. And shame is a phenomenal pillar of society, right? Which
Chrono Trigger.
Like shame has
Chrono Trigger.
I'll say for the students and students listening, like shame and avoidance is one of the biggest problems I have to deal with students, where they've failed an assignment or they haven't even failed an assignment. They're doing badly on an assignment. And rather than do badly on an assignment because that's shameful, they'll take a 0. Because the 0 is perceived as less shameful than the bad feedback they would get from the instructor, which is madness. Please don't do that. But it is honestly a phenomenal problem I have to deal with.
So I got a question. So in my own like personality, like just to bring it back to something a little bit more to a thing, I find myself almost devoid of shame. And what I mean by that is that like, it's just like I will ask you whatever it is if I don't understand it, and I don't care. I don't care if I look stupid.
Yeah.
Because to me, there's never a dumb question.
And that's kind of where I'm going with this, because when a person is devoid of shame. This can have like two outcomes. The one is the positive outcome, where suddenly you're brave and you can say things that need to, you say things that you feel you need to say. You feel like they're important, right? It can also, of course, have a very negative impact on communities as well. Mm-hmm. There's a story about a player in World of Warcraft that I interacted with a lot, and I really sort of like this as a story. It talks about kind of like shame and the curious effects it can have on video games. So there's a human mage on our server called Sheriff. And Sheriff was a great PvPer, like a really phenomenal PvPer. Top tier, he'd blow away 2 or 3 guys without any problems at all here, right? There's a lot of respect built into that. But also, he griefed constantly. Like 24 hours a day, he was killing everybody he could get his hands on in the world, right? Like just no regard for who they were. And if he killed them 10 times already, he'd kill them again. Just a pointlessly remorseless killer, okay? And now, okay, so everybody hates Sheriff. That's, we could take that as a given. But what's really neat about that is that on the inverse, I saw lots of occasions where like groups would form to try to fight Sheriff because he was seen in the area. Like positive social gatherings started to happen to try to oppose Sheriff. Guilds would form to try to oppose Sheriff, right? So in all his efforts to be like sort of this horrible boogeyman, he actually winds up doing sort of like a lot of social, a lot of social actions. Like, he's being very bestial, right? But in being bestial, he's actually in ruining some players' experience. He's actually improving the experience of lots of other players. Yeah. And the feeling of satisfaction when you manage to finally kill Sheriff is off the charts, right? Yeah, and suddenly the fact that he killed you 40 times doesn't matter because I got him on the 41st time. And it's so cool because sports doesn't work like that, but video games do, which I think is pretty darn neat.
Yeah, well, that's, what's funny is that, like, I come from the FGC, so fighting game community, and it's like this whole idea that some people go out of their way to be the bad guy, almost like watching wrestling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it sounds really silly, but one person will be a complete bastard on purpose.
Yeah.
To create that drama so that he can rise to the ranks.
Yeah.
To be the bad guy to beat.
Yeah.
And it sort of builds this sort of legacy.
Yeah.
Which it's such a weird thing, but it's like, wrestling is for that. I can't think of society actually allowing something like that. Like, well, I mean, Trump in a sense is kind of that guy,
Absolutely.
In a way, right? Like he's kind of playing the bad guy right now.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
and he's doing a very good job of it.
He's doing a very good job. I think we're all united.
Yeah. And sort of like the inverse of shame is reputation, right? And it's sort of interesting that an anonymous person, which is what most people are online, an anonymous person has no reputation, and as such is free to be bestial, right? Or free to find some sort of redemption as well, right? And suddenly become a good guy.
So bestial means bestial, what exactly?
Like a beast, right?
Oh, like a beast. Okay.
Yeah. So like there's a line in Othello, right, where I think Othello says it in Act 2. He says, "Oh, I've lost my reputation. I've lost the immortal part of myself, and what remains is bestial."
It's the beast
Othello
is left.
Losing his reputation, suddenly he's fallen, but he's also bizarrely free to do anything he sort of feels like, right? Which I think is really, really interesting. There's a book by John Ronson on shame that's well worth reading to anybody listening here. I think it's his "So You've Been Internet Shamed" is what it's called. It's a really good book. Okay, so shame, basically speaking, is something that I think is really interesting and totally worth unpacking, right? Because again, I think there's genre that can come out of that, or at least there's componential elements, things which could be incorporated into existing genre. Like I did team sports when I was younger. I played baseball. I was a good baseball player, right? But I really hated it because when my teammates made a mistake, we lost the game, and that was bad. And then if I made a mistake, then our team lost, and that was horrible, right? Because now I've caused like a whole group of people to fail. So it meant that I grew up kind of thinking I didn't like sports, right? And then I got older and I got into martial arts where it's very different. Like you can be on a team, but you're very much competing like one-on-one, and your losses are your own loss. They don't carry on to the team's losses, this kind of stuff. And suddenly I discovered I love sports, right? And that's so important. Like it's so important that a person have a physical relationship with their own body, right? Like you're not just like a carrying device for your brain, right? But it took a whole other kind of branch of sport for me to discover that I even liked that kind of stuff, and still like it to this day. Like I still really miss sparring and just being properly physically fit and whatnot.
Yeah.
I was talking with somebody else about this. I hope she's in the chat, actually. It'd be nice if she turned on her camera and chimed in here about gymnastics and the way that, oh good, Kara is in the chat, about gymnastics and the way that she was good at gymnastics, but just the team was a very unpleasant place to be, right? A very, very unpleasant place to be. And as a result, she sort of disengaged and quit something that she was good at and maybe even enjoyed, just because the community was so toxic. Now, how much does that sound like a video game, right, at that point? There you go. Oh, there's Carol. Great. Hi, Carol. How are you?
Hey, Carol.
Good.
How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm good. This is a super interesting conversation, Chris.
Yeah,
Thanks for
the students in the
sending
chat,
it over.
Carol's actually a GD alum from many years ago, and now she runs a small video game company that's making a game for Square Enix. And her and I talked about some of these shame components before. And it's so neat because when Carol was talking about kind of the gymnastics experience, like that sounds like somebody talking about like League of Legends or Dota or something like this. Like, here's this thing that I love and enjoy, but I quit because the community drove me out of it. So I think it's quite neat.
Yeah, and it's because I think like sadly in competitive spaces, and this is something that we have to make a better effort of building into like online and social games.
Yeah.
Is the notion of a space for vulnerability, right? And for feedback loops that players can give to each other, because we almost like trust only the game to be the source of feedback.
That's right.
But like some of the best online experiences that I've had in games was when players themselves engage with feedback, right? And like that's when but those players are rare, you know. It's not very common to find in League of Legends a player that will take the time to mentor you or to say you're messing up in this ways, but here's what you need to be doing. It's either you have the ability to go and do the research yourself and the skills and patience to build yourself up, or leave because you're not good enough.
Yeah.
And obviously this is on Carol's mind a lot, because I mean you're making a multiplayer game.
Yeah.
Like your community is going to have a tremendous determinant on your success.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're making a racing game where of 12 players online, like only one will win, right? Yeah. So how do you make it so that those other 11 players first of all don't feel shame for playing, but also like have a positive experience.
Yeah, they still feel like a progression, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So does that come into sort of like your economy, like having an economy or some sort of single player element to bolster that sort of multiplayer aspect? Is that what the approach kind of solve that problem, or what? What do you think, Caroline?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So for example, if you have a multiplayer focus game, that's kind of where the highest level of play will always go. Now, what you need is, from my opinion, is there is a single player element that helps foster somebody from a casual.
Yeah.
And you can build them up into an intermediate. And that's probably where a lot of that reaching out from the community comes from.
Yeah.
To building right into hardcore. And hardcore is where you kind of want everybody to be there, but they're not gonna. You're gonna have this tiering effect of people moving up the ladder and finding different satisfaction with your product.
Yeah,
definitely.
There's sort of like, I think, two components there, because one of the big like philosophical questions of games that I think every developer needs to ask themselves is an entirely positive online experience for everyone possible? You know, is it some sort of like trolley car problem where like some users are going to be stuck to the tracks, or is it actually possible for everyone to have a positive experience? And I tend to think actually it is possible, although like maybe bizarrely so. And I think it's a combination of two things. Some of it are technological. Carol, remember like years ago, you and I talked about like using euphemism in language as a way of kind of like curing online chat, which I think, like, I still think it's a really interesting technology. And it's
definitely.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And then the other one is kind of the idea of sportsmanship. And the idea that sportsmanship basically doesn't exist in sort of the online world. But when sportsmanship exists in the real world, it's fantastic. Like the level of satisfaction is better than the sport itself, you know? And I really believe that's one of the missing components in sort of like the online world right now. I know like Riot Games and big companies like that, like they spend a fortune right now on trying to sort of like bake sportsmanship into the game, right? And then kind of like, I don't know, coaching, I suppose, is one of the other things that we've talked about too, right? And it's like you know, I see in the chat here, somebody says like, anytime there's competition, someone's going to have a bad time, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Then you go to like, then you go to a high school track and field day where everybody can have a good time. Like,
yeah, but that being said, it's, I think perhaps losing, being a good loser is sort of one of the issues perhaps that's plaguing our society right now. Is, I mean, I'm not going to say that I understand it, but it feels as though there was a movement to the I can win style.
Yeah.
And if everybody gets a participation trophy,
yeah,
or you're always getting awarded for not putting the effort in, then what happens is there is a lot of poor losers.
Yeah, but think about other games you played though, like Catan and chess and Go and whatnot. There are no poor losers in those games, or at least the numbers are so small as to be insignificant. Like the number of table flips that happen after a game of Catan has to be in the low numbers, right?
So that's more of an exception to the rule. Like if you're taking wrestling, for example, right? One person pins the other person, it's done. Or martial arts, it's kind of like one versus the other. And one has to be the winner, one has to not. If you have team-based, the team wins, the team loses. So depending on all of those different variations, you can have, I just think the blanket statement of saying, hey, you know, like nobody's ever going to lose is sort of, depends what we're talking about.
But that's not what I mean though, right? And I think actually the martial arts example is a really good one, right? Because like I lost a lot when I did martial arts competitions, like lots and lots. And I never cared.
Yeah,
you know, like,
exactly.
Never think. And that's kind of the missing bit is I think that notion of sportsmanship is a really critical point. And I think it's something that's worth sort of asking, like, okay, so how do you create a culture of sportsmanship, or even what is sportsmanship in these contexts?
It's about, like, I think we tend to think about sportsmanship as like player to player, competitor to competitor respect. But I think especially in racing games and in a lot of fighting communities, especially the ones that I've seen online, sportsmanship is at the level of not just like how respectful we're going to be of each other, but how much we care about the sport as a community.
That's true.
You know, like my brother talks a lot about how like his favorite, I guess we call it racing type. His favorite category is IndyCar because it's such a risk-prone category, right? Like the cars go so fast and they're going in an oval, so one mistake from another can cost the life of another driver in an instant. And so the sportsmanship manifests in our priority before winning is keeping each other alive. Because keeping each other alive keeps the sport alive, and we can keep racing, and we can all go home knowing that nobody died in the racetrack.
Yeah, and I think that's really quite important to think about, because like sportsmanship doesn't just mean being a good loser, which I think is what most people interpret it as, right?
That's true.
Sportsmanship is like any action you do that keeps the community alive and healthy. That's sportsmanship. So it's mentoring, it's coaching, it's losing, it's winning, it's all of those things as well, right? Which then kind of begs that question, like what can you do inside a game design to create a culture of sportsmanship? And in creating a culture of sportsmanship, you have less sense of shame within the games themselves too, which I think matters a lot.
Okay, so here's a question.
Sure.
Is shame, so what I'm hearing right now is that shame is sort of the enemy, per se, just as a blanket statement. What can we look at shame and say, is shame necessary? When is there right shame?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like we can't be if we don't have shame, then we can't learn from our mistakes, or you know what I mean? Like it almost feels like by giving people rewards every single time they lose, or always having that padding,
Yeah.
I think that's more detrimental.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a really good book by Sarah Pascoe called I think it's called like Love, Sex, Money or something like this, where she talks about sort of like the biological value of shame and whatnot. I'll find the book's title for you guys because I think like she did one book called Animal, which is a autobiography of the female body, and it's a great book. Like every man in the chat really needs to read that book just the best way. Like
Education, man.
And it's like honestly, I learned so much, and it's really great. And then the other one is a book she did called Sex, Power, Money, which she wrote because she did this book on the female body, and in doing so, of course, she learned a lot about like young men. And then she wrote this other book about it's not really a book about young men, but it is sort of about like the biology of how biology sort of intersects with human behavior. It's a really interesting book. So I stuck him in the chat for the people who want to check him out.
Yeah.
And I forget where I was going with that, but oh yeah, right, because it was sort of talking about like shame, and is shame a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, or is shame like a currency that we have a very limited amount to spend? You know, like sometimes it is okay to shame, right?
That's interesting. I never thought of that.
Yeah. And I don't pretend to know the answer to that. Like just as like as an educator, my instinct is just to be like, shame is bad. Don't pursue shame. There is no value there, right? But then, you know, I also do jokes online about how like it's always okay to shame a Nazi. You know, like there are limits to these things if you go down the rabbit hole enough. Let me pull up my. There we go.
Yeah, it's
because it's on that Jeff, on that note about it's okay to shame on like on another who's breaking our values.
Yeah.
It comes back to the point of how like I think where shame is poorly exercised, I guess if you can ever exercise shame, it's that we might internalize it as knowing that we don't belong to where we're trying to belong to.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
And part of that is definitely biology. Like imposter syndrome is such a consequence of technology, and people really need to accept that because it correlates with shame, right? Like we're built evolutionary to compare ourselves to about 100 people. You know, like that's our kind of maximum Stone Age group, roughly that. And then, of course, we live in a world where you can compare yourself. So, Jeff, you don't compare yourself to my artistic ability. You compare yourself to every artist on Earth. And
I don't.
And you, well, okay, you don't. Lots of artists do. I know that's why you're great because you're free of that, right? But
I just don't care. I'm like, you know,
but lots of artists do. Like or you know, like whatever. Like you know, I don't compare myself to like other dads my age. I got to compare myself to like Chris Hemsworth or something. You know, and I think it's quite neat to think about that. The fact that evolutionary, you are not even built for mirrors. Never mind a world where you can compare yourself to millions and millions of people.
You're not built for mirrors? What do you mean by that? That's an interesting
like
thought.
if we're primates in the savannah or even like a Stone Age technology, you could go your whole life and all your ancestors could go their whole life and never see their own face.
Oh, that's right. So even the water reflection is probably the only place that they've ever seen their own reflection.
That's right. So, you know, like it's sort of this notion like, you know, I'm not supposed to compare I compare myself with the three most handsome men of the 100-person community, right? But instead of comparing myself to those three most handsome men, I have to compare myself to millions and millions of people.
I guess that's the whole point, is that in this day and age, you need to give up.
Yeah.
Like you gotta look internally, and you gotta say, hey, what can I do for my own personal satisfaction?
Yeah.
That's all it comes down to, because it's like, I never asked for this. I never asked to be tall, hairy, you know, whatever, have bad eyesight. Like it doesn't matter. Like all this stuff is genetic lottery. Yeah. And I won in certain ways, and I freaking lost terribly in other ways.
Yeah. And
all of that has to be sort of addressed with, figured out, and accepted.
Yeah.
Because I can't change it.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important that everybody needs to do, thing that everybody needs to do, is recognize that you're not supposed to compare yourself to all these sorts of people, and you're not even built to compare yourself to all these people.
Yeah.
So why are you doing it? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're not comparing yourself to, even comparing yourself to your past self is a little unfair, right?
It's true.
And yet here we are. Like, you know, I'm sneaking up on 50 here, and I'm broadly proud of the shape I'm in, even though compared to any magazine, I'm in terrible shape, right? But I think in accepting that, like I'm not supposed to look like that, it's actually been very freeing for me.
What's so funny is that a lot of people, sorry, Carolina.
No, I was just gonna say that it's like one thought that came to mind is how because what you said really resonates. And I was reading recently journals for when I was like starting my career, and there was a lot of regret of where I was at in my age, in comparison to my peers back in Mexico and stuff like that. And it was just so interesting looking back at the fact that like I had not even learned, or the concept did not exist in my mind, to create like your own definition of success. You know, like success these days to me means I wake up in the morning without like, you know, the heavy weight of anxiety most days. Which is
exactly.
Great. Like pretty successful.
Continue.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like I feel that again, like if we can bring back the conversation to game design, that's something we do terribly, right? Like to extend to players an opportunity to set their own definitions for success, right? Like when we use leaderboards and stuff like that, there's really fun ways to create those systems to be engaging, but we have to be very careful of not saying this is how you play this game successfully. And if you're not here and there's like no spectrum that is relevant or rewarded or you know, recognized, then that gap might seem that's where this engagement is, right? I'm here and I'm terrible at this game, and this is how I should be playing, so I'm just gonna leave because I don't belong here.
I don't know about you guys, but like the highest levels of satisfaction I get out of multiplayer games is when I'm helping other players do a complicated thing they couldn't do on their own, right? And that's completely, that's not connected with leaderboards, it's not connected with any of that kind of stuff, right?
I think that speaks a little bit to sort of your teaching sort of desire. Like for myself as well, I'm a teacher. It's what I do. So when I get into these situations, I find myself taking on that role as a teacher. Now, it's not always the case. There's other types of people that will not want to teach other people other things. They're either like racing against themselves, or it's not about bringing up the whole, it's about self-improvement, or maybe my circle of friends or whatever it may be. So I think the motivation that you share, perhaps I agree. I have that same one because I'm a teacher like you, but that's not everybody. Do you know what I mean?
I think when you're helping other players like that, though, it gives you a bit of perspective on your own progress in the game, more so than a leaderboard would do. You know, this idea that, oh yeah, this used to be really hard for me, but now I've got all these things and it's actually pretty simple for me now, right? And suddenly you're more cognizant of like all the effort you did, or maybe all the effort you did, you actually see the payout from it finally, which games do a bad job of, because we tend to match challenge with your progression, which makes your progression meaningless, right? Like if we're stuck in that eternal Red Queen race of you're plus 10 strength, so all the monsters have plus 10 hit points to match, it's as if my strength stayed exactly the same.
I disagree with that statement. And the reason why is that when you play MMOs, you go back to the earlier sections and you just you don't even want to play against those mobs because you're so low level. But when you do get out of that first zone, you can hang with the next zone. When you come back to that zone, you are just trashing every single thing. And there's a good feeling about that. There's a very empowering feeling that you've learned, or you're up to that level now. So depending on the game, like I almost feel like there is no blanket statement for games in general, because there's always a game out there that defies the conventions. And I think maybe that's like
Oh, we lost you briefly there.
Right. Oh, sorry. Am I still here?
You're back now. It's funny. Every time I say that, you come back right away.
Again, it's the headset. I think it's a little odd, but so that's all I'm thinking, is that even though certain genres foster certain communities, the really, really ultra competitive first person shooters, fighting games, League of Legends, like we're talking like, yeah, like there's always a level to be had at that level. And then there's sort of more of a casual leaderboards and all that kind of stuff. There's a different level of competition that kind of, in my opinion, filters down to the next level of games.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but
no, I hear you. And it's funny because this is part of why I like talking about it, because we like different sorts of games.
Yeah, exactly.
So like you love fighting games or whatnot, right? And and I have a lot of trouble with fighting games here, because a lot of times if a friend of mine wants to engage me in a fighting game, they're kind of saying like, hey, you practice this game for 100 hours, and then we can have a competitive match, right?
Yeah.
It's part of why I was so interested in that Star Wars MMO when it came out, because they tried to have a PvP system that let kind of like, you know, whatever, a level 5 player be equal weight versus a level 30 player, which I thought was really neat. Because that system exists in lots of traditional sports, right? But less so in normal games, like handicap systems and stuff like that.
That's right.
But I think it's really cool. Like I love the way that, in theory, at least, I could play golf against a pro golfer today, because his handicap is understood and my handicap is understood, right? And I think that's pretty darn neat. But like, you know, if I play Mario Kart against my son, for example, like I'll just get stomped, like ruthlessly stomped over and over again, because he's got like 1,000 hours more practice than I do. And the game's got no way of really compensating for that beyond the, you know, power-ups and things like this they've added that feel
the blue shell and whatever.
Yeah, which feel a little artificial compared to
it does
balancing things. Yeah. There's actually one of the points of technology here too that I think is quite neat, is the way the difficulty curves, of course, are going to go away, right? In the sense of, we have a difficulty curve, and the difficulty curve is being applied to all players, or it's divided into like rough groups, like easy, medium, hard, or something. That 100% will disappear from the game industry because of machine learning. You know, in the way that a game company can take your whatever Steam Play information, and from that Steam Play information, create a difficulty curve for you and you alone. And eventually, maybe even soon, that'll be a trivial task computationally.
Yeah, because if I think back in my experiences, I'd say Left 4 Dead was the first time I've ever seen a system like that. And I played the hell out of that first game, about 6 months worth with friends, and never got bored of it. I had only got bored once they released a new one and basically cannibalized their own community, basically.
Yeah. And Left 4 Dead is like a really primitive example of it, right? Like that's the notion of like, you know, because basically their only dial is like, if there's not enough zombies, add zombies, right? Like it's a pretty kind of like brute force solution to it. But it could be stuff like, okay, so I'm playing a Skyrim-esque game, and in my Skyrim-esque game, the health and speed and combat attributes of every single enemy could be tuned specifically to me based off of the play information derived from my other video games, which I think is pretty darn cool, right? Also scary too, because that's literally somebody's job. You know, like all those balance designers now have to become like more meta designers. Yeah. But it happened in mobile games already, so it'll certainly happen in kind of your traditional console titles. Yeah.
I got a question.
All right. See you, Caro. It was nice to see you.
Oh, yeah.
We'll run another one of these. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about the impact. What's your guys' assessment of mobile gaming? What is the good and the bad that has come from mobile gaming? Because part of me...
Are you just asking us in general, or...
Oh, anybody goes. Just I'd love to know.
I think the good is penetration, right? Like in the sense that all these people that never would have bought a console now have a phone which is more powerful than the consoles are, right? Like that's certainly the good.
Yeah,
for us, that's opportunity, right? Tremendous opportunity. But then we only really have like a handful of successful games that have been put on those platforms here, and I think there's so much more work that can be done there. Okay, Riley.
So Riley.
I'd say it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sure, you got so many new like customers just basically going in for the first time because, well, for one, they had to get the phone anyway because that's what all our cell phones are basically are. They figure, well, if it's here, might as well give it a try, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, a lot of those early games were kind of rather predatory towards the new audience, especially if free to play microtransactions.
That's exactly what I'm saying. There's a very narrow frontage of success right now. Overly narrow here. So before we get Emmanuel here, I think Quentin wanted to say something. Let's get Quentin.
I actually think I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Renak was before me.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, sure.
Ronak.
Yeah, Ronak.
Raunak, yeah.
Yeah. My what do you this so what happened is basically if you look at gaming in cell phones, it's been there since the generation of the Nokia 1100s with Snake and everything, right?
Mhm.
What people realize, I think, is that it's like people like it's right. You said like people who don't have any consoles, but that would only means like cell phones are much more economical when it comes to like having games on that much of a screen.
Yeah.
Although yes, they will limit your field of view and everything. But if you look at how large the community, like the cell phone gaming community would be, it would be like it is. I'm assuming it's much more than the console people who have consoles right now.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting like language discrepancy there too, because somebody who owns a console will call themselves a gamer, right? Like I'd call myself a gamer. But somebody who has $1,000 cell phone and like 500 hours of Candy Crush will not call themselves a gamer.
That's right.
That's amazing, right? Because like by any reasonable definition, yes, you are, right? And I deeply believe actually that sort of the word gamer is going to go away. You know, like we don't call anybody a movier, right? Just sometimes, right? I think more or less the same thing's happening there. Okay, so I want to get Quentin. Let's get your point, and then Emmanuel after that, I think.
I similar to like what you said is like gamer is definitely going to disappear because I don't know if you guys read the interview of the actor who played in the Dark Knight series. He played the police officer who is technically Robin.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Like he had an interview and he was talking about how gaming is the next, like at some point like movies will eventually die out.
Yeah.
And gaming will just take over as like the interactive experience.
Yeah. Go please.
And mobile games is at least cell phones is definitely like the lead into that. Because similar to like what you said, like, you know, eventually not everyone has a home console and everyone probably has a cell phone.
Yeah.
And cell phones are basically becoming as powerful as computers.
Yeah.
And it's just like this evolution of technology will lead into that. And it's just on a completely kind of side point is like, you know, China has the largest mobile device market out of like, I think they have, so I did basic Google for like their general gaming population is 500 million people, and it's 80% of that is all mobile games too.
Yeah.
You know, and that's definitely going to be like a huge rise in numbers for like North America and stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, eventually you're right. Like the term gamer will, I feel like gamer will become like a niche term for like a very specific kind of person who like maybe only buys consoles or something. But
it's sort of like that notion of like when historically and even in the present day when people try to imagine the future, they just think it's more of now. Like ask some guy at Microsoft what the future is going to be like. You're going to say, oh, it's going to be like your 44 core Xbox. Of course, that's what the future of gaming is, right? That's what the future. But then I look at my son, right, who has no preconceptions about what it's supposed to be, right? Like we have this strong notion that a TV show is 22 minutes or 44 minutes and a film is 2 hours long or 90 minutes long. Like that's our idea of entertainment. And my son, who isn't connected to all that, just doesn't care about any of those numbers. So as much as we try to connect him to those things and try to connect him to those pre-existing patterns, he doesn't even understand why he would be connected with those things. Yeah. Emmanuel, what's your point? I want to hear this.
Yeah, so like going back to kind of Jeff's question that he had initially, I think that the good that is coming with mobile games is mostly the shame is being taken out of you play games.
Yeah.
Like I think that it is being taken out and it will be taken out more and more, especially with like kids now playing a lot of video games on mobile and spending a lot of time with these celebrities and watching these celebrities play.
Yeah.
I think that this will play like a huge role in gamers not being seen anymore as creatures that are afraid of light and and how to like they don't know how to contact people and like have an social interaction, but we will be seen as humans I think.
Yeah, and I really deeply believe too, there's so much we can do with genre on mobile devices. Like, I think we've really shortchanged ourselves in terms of the possibility. Like, here's a game called Star Realms that I really like, and I play a lot of Star Realms, like a lot of Star Realms here. Like, and it's a premium game. It's not free to play or anything like this. And if anything, I like it more on the phone than I did back when it was a physical card game. And it's always so neat to think about that, just because every time we discover something, we have phenomenal financial success that comes out the other side. Oh boy, I'm getting work here. Okay, great.
So was there anybody else that had any other thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, here.
Yeah, I wanna.
Yeah, please do.
Have a little. One of the things is that we as humans are social beings. So one of the things that you were saying, like from the oral tradition, one of the things that we've been evolving is our way to communicate something. Since oral tradition, then we get to the writing. We get to the books at what point, and it was like the best way of communicating someone's story. But right now we got like this what games offer. It's a way that not only I will tell you a story, it's you will become part of it and you will have a saying in it.
Yeah.
It's I think it's like the next level or the next step on narrative, because it's a new level of agency that you get to your audience. So that I think it's how movies are going to evolve, because movies are still just one way. It's like I am telling you a story, and you cannot affect anything. So that's one of the best things that game offer is the involvement of the audience with your story.
Yeah. And actually, one of my real pet peeves in games is when a game starts trying to turn into somebody's failed movie career. You know? It's nice that you wished you worked in film. Maybe you should go work in film. You know, and
heavy rain
all the time, right?
Oh God, don't get me started.
It's obvious you want to work in film. Go work in film.
Chris.
Go work in film.
Has anybody here done the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt sort of choose your own adventure, which is in Netflix?
I tried those things and I didn't like them.
The Kimmy Schmidt one I think is really well done. I never watched the TV series. I just went straight to the choose your own adventure one. I think it was done very well, like very well. And it felt like the sort of, kind of interactive experience that, I mean, kind of a gimmicky interpretation of it, right? But I thought it was a very, I don't know, good use of the medium, I guess, for want of a better term.
I guess just from my point of view is that I'm a completionist, and I do not like the fact that it's given me all these different choices, and I'm like, do I have to go back and watch this all over again and pick all and then remember what I picked and pick the other one so I can see all the content?
Yeah, Bandersnatch was bad for that. And in fact, I do think that like that kind of choose your own adventure film, like that's a little fad and eventually it'll go away, right? But
yeah,
it is worth noting anytime there's like a new success in a media, right? I always think that's worth noting too. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that's an hour. Thanks everybody, that was a good time. We'll do another one of these. Jeff and I chat a lot, so we'll sort of invite you guys to it. I hope that was fun for you all too. Otherwise, talk soon.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.